I'm just going. Thank you very much for letting me know that you could not hear me. This would have been very annoying otherwise. So welcome everybody to the launch of the REN21 Renewable Energy and Sustainability Report. We will have three parts of this event. So some welcoming remarks, the presentation of the report, and then a roundtable discussion. This event is being live streamed and on LinkedIn. And please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to post them basically in the chat function. And when you don't speak, please mute yourself. But if you want to speak, then unmute yourself. So I think we can start.
You're breaking up again. We can't hear you.
You're fading again, yes.
Rana, we don't hear you.
In our offices. There is a better problem.
No,
can you hear me like
still
this,
not,
or?
Yes, better now. Yeah.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to.
No, we can't hear. The sound is broken.
We're going to change the internet. I'm very sorry. Can you connect to the internet? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Loud and
Yes.
clear.
So sincerest apologies. You would hope that in the middle of Paris we would not run into these issues, but we have some bandwidth problems here. So we just changed the network. That's the good thing. We have alternative networks. So I'll just kick this off again. I'm very happy to welcome you here in this virtual space to the official launch of the REN21 Renewable Energy and Sustainability Report. For the ones of you who don't know me, my name is Rana. I'm heading the REN21 Secretariat here in Paris. We'll have three parts, basically. Some welcoming remark, the presentation of the findings of the report, and then a roundtable discussion with some of the contributors and experts. And if you have any questions, please put the questions already in the chat function. And I would be very thankful if all of you who don't speak could mute yourself. So here we are. And I think we're sharing some slides. I need to share them now. The team is sharing the slides, and can you see them? Okay, I'll just yes. Excellent. Sorry, it's not working. Can you hear me? Back? Yes. Okay. So maybe to start is like, who's REN21? And I think when we're speaking about REN21, it's really important to, we're a multi-stakeholder community. We're bringing together basically players from governments, industry, science and academia, NGOs, and all working together really to advance renewables now, accelerate renewables now, and make this shift happen. We're doing this building on our members, but also a large international community of more than 4,000 players that is heavily involved in all REN21 activities. But one of the entry points is really to build crowdsourced data and information to advance basically renewables in the policy space into the public space and support communication and foster dialogue and debates. Now, building on this, I think you already see, like, as a multi-stakeholder network, multi-stakeholder and the diversity of perspectives is the REN21 DNA. What is also particular is obviously as a renewable network, it is about renewable energy. And here our approach is very much illustrated, I think, by this image. You have probably seen this from the Renewables Global Status Report. There has been massive advantages and advancements on renewable energy, so massive advancements. But it's also very clear that we're still operating in a fossil fuel-based energy system, economy, and society. And this is really showing how our approach is. REN21 is focusing obviously on the renewable energy part, whether it is from the supply through the energy infrastructure, but also the consumption of renewable energy and demand signals in demand sectors. But it's also looking very much into not only the energy system part, but also the socioeconomic impacts and the value creation around it. So really renewable energy at the heart of the energy system, but also the economy and society. What is also clear is renewables need to go hand in hand with energy saving and energy efficiency more globally, but also phasing out fossil fuel. I spoke about renewable energy at the heart of society. And I think this is the other entry point very clearly. The energy transition is not only about changing the fuel, it's about changing our economy and society. And I think the sustainability topic really fits into this aspect. We clearly need to build societal acceptance for renewable energy by phasing out fossil fuel and making the shifts happen. Renewable energy have a diversity of examples and advantages that for diversity of players. What is very clear, however, is when you look at those dimensions, I guess, of the transformations, there is a diversity of actors and viewpoints that need to be involved in moving the transition ahead. Now, this sets basically a broader context for the context on the objectives of the renewable energy and sustainability reports. I think we all agree, even if there were loopholes, that the COP28 agreement has been a historic agreement for renewable energy, with parties really anchoring in the agreement the tripling renewables capacity and doubling energy efforts by 2030. So it is very clear that the transition to renewables needs to happen. It needs to happen now, and it's also being recognized. When we're looking into what basically this triple renewables capacity means, it actually means that we need to double renewable capacity additions from 510 gigawatt in 2023 to 1,000 gigawatt per year from now on. So it's very clear that it's a massive undertaking. It means that we need to massively ramp up investment. They need to more than double per year. And when we're looking beyond 2030, it's very clear that when you're looking at the IEA and the IRENA scenarios, that renewable energy is basically the main anchor and pillar of the energy system, with approximately 90% of total final electricity consumption being produced by renewables, and between 71 to 82, depending on the scenarios, for the total final energy consumption. So this is what needs to happen, and there is really an agreement for it. But this also raises certain questions. And we see that these questions are, there are many questions. Some are really around the sustainability of renewable energy. And we also see when you're looking at present, even though after COP the messages were very clear, we have seen like a ramp up of sustainability topics being put out in media and the public space. And to make basically the transition happen, it is very important to provide the evidence, but also inspiring stories to address this. Also locally, because we see that local pushback very clearly has an impact on permitting durations and is basically delaying some of the quick developments we need to see to reach the 2030 targets. Now, in the sustainability report, I think really building on the multi-stakeholder and diversity of perspectives part, a systems approach, it is very clear that our general approach of basically the community, but also combining knowledge with dialogue and debate and communication to change basically norms, is the overarching approach. The overall objective of the Renewable Energy and Sustainability Report is clearly to fast-track the uptake of renewables and so enable this, but also prohibit that is being delayed by providing science and evidence-based narrative on the sustainability of renewables, by showcasing existing solutions to avoid and mitigate potential negative impacts. The reality is any infrastructure does have impacts, and we need to look at those. And to clearly anchor the value of renewables compared to other energy sources. The idea here is also that this information that has been crowdsourced is providing facts to address concerns, myths, and misconceptions in the public space. Last but not least, and I think really in this approach, we need to build a common ground for the energy transition. And what is required for this is really having multipliers and players involved amongst different sectors, different stakeholder groups, to really ensure that this transition is being supported by many players and the society at large. This is from my side. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Andrea Weiner, who is the project manager of the Renewable Energy and Sustainability Report and has really driven this big endeavor throughout the last 18 months. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rana, and thank you everyone for being here today. I am really happy to see this project come to life. And well, Rana has explained the intentions of the report. And before diving into the findings, I'm sorry, I have a Zoom issue. Okay. Before diving into the findings, I would like to say that to achieve these objectives, one of the most important pillars has been to build on REN21 community here today, and to follow our collaborative approach. And this project was extremely ambitious, we need to say, and it would have not been possible without the contribution of this community. To bring together so many perspectives and viewpoints and to navigate the enormous amount of information out there, it has required the work of course, the authors and special advisors, but also the contributions of an expert advisory committee. We organized 4 extremely rich workshops, many expert interviews, crowdsourced data collection, and quite some extensive peer reviews. And well, I will try to get not too much emotional right now, but I would like to mention that as the coordinator of this project, I'm extremely happy and proud of what we have achieved here, and conscious of how much involvement it has required from everyone. And well, I lack words to thank everyone, but I will try to explain exactly what is in the report now. Briefly, I won't be long. You will be able to read the report in detail, or maybe less in detail. The objective today is rather to enjoy an open discussion and a very quick refresh of what's in the report. Also for those who are joining in the first time, the report provides an overview of the benefits, many benefits, and the power potential impacts of renewables deployment. we look into the interactions of renewables with ecosystems regarding indicators such as land use, water use, greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, biodiversity. We also look into the issue of materials required, which ones are needed, which ones are critical, looked into circularity options and the impacts of mining, and we look also into the social aspects under the lens of energy justice, with topics such as access to energy, affordability of renewables, jobs creation or job losses, the questions of human rights and labor rights, and citizens' participation in the energy system. And important to mention is that the areas are, the project provides a number of examples of good practices and success stories from effective policies, from industry standards and certifications, which sometimes involve multi-stakeholder governance, and also civil society initiatives. And I encourage you to dive into the report to find a lot of examples already existing. And also important to say is that this project should be seen as a starting point. It's not exhaustive, some topics could not be covered, but it provides already a basis and a structure for further research. What happened during this process? Well, we understood that the assessment of the potential impacts of renewables and the solutions to avoid them can differ among actors. We had sometimes intense debates that were always very exciting, because at the end, there's, however, a common ground, a common understanding about what sustainable practices are. And this was made possible thanks to the collaborative approach. And despite it took many reviews and many contributions, and at the end of the day, we can see that there is an agreement on what is sustainable and how to make this happen. And so that's the great news. On the process and on the methodology front, well, we face in many cases the complex issue of either lacking data, having too much, differing data, or being obliged to compare pears and apples. A little bit, the takeaway of this process is that we need to be mindful of the complexity of assessing sustainability, to highlight that the impacts of renewables or any infrastructure deployment is extremely context specific because of the diversity of the locations, the diversity of the technologies and sub-technologies, etc. And it's important to communicate about this also in the public space to avoid bold or oversimplified statements. Also that reliable recent data is sometimes missing, and this is highlights the need for the continuous tracking and harmonization, and that collaboration and multi-stakeholder perspectives are key to close these gaps. This is just a little bit some examples of figures that we put together for the report, trying to show the diversity of assessments for the same technologies. We have a huge range of differences for land use, for water use, etc. And this is those are complex figures to look at. And by the way, it's complex to do. But again, it's important to highlight that you cannot say water use is this for this. Those are specificities we need to look at. This is the one for land use, reflecting the same kind of complexities. Also, that details are important. For instance, when we are discussing the projections of the materials required for the energy transition, when taking a closer look to the projections here from our colleagues from IEA, we can see that the bulk of increase, for instance, in materials demand related to electricity is related to to electricity networks and battery storage, especially for electric vehicles batteries, and of course those are very important for the energy transition and for the systemic energy transition. But we can also see that the projected increases for solar, PV, and wind are a small share of this projection. So that's also something important to mention when bringing the debate in the public space. So what are the key findings at the end? Well, no surprise. I mean, we can say that renewables are the most sustainable energy source. That's no doubt. They drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions and pollutions. They do not harm human health. they can contribute to land restoration, they have far lower impacts on biodiversity, they can create jobs and create local value. They are key to increase energy access and to alleviate energy poverty. And because of the decentralized nature, they allow for citizen participation, for local governance, for local value, and they can be tailored to local specificities. One of the but the important thing to say here is that the RESR, what the RESR gathers is data from a wide range of stakeholders. It provides well-documented examples and numbers showing that the evidence of these statements. This is one example of the data. Is the greenhouse gas emissions assessment from our colleagues from NREL, and we can see that even the worst performing renewables emit less greenhouse gas emissions than fossil fuels. And here comes another enlightening point from the report, which is the order of magnitudes when we are discussing materials extraction. And one of the arguments circulating in the public space is that renewables require minerals. But when we look at what is happening today, well, today we are extracting around 8 billion tons of coal, 4 billion tons of oil, and the equivalent of 2.6 billion tons of fossil gas every year. And those enormous quantities are just burnt, meaning that we need to start again next year, burning the same amount. And this is only in 1 year, a third of the total remaining carbon budget. I mean, burning this is about 35 gigatons of CO2 in a year. And that's a third of the total carbon budget we have if we are to reach the targets, to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. And when it comes to renewables, we can see that the quantities of minerals required to build facilities and infrastructure is completely dwarfed in comparison to fossil fuels. And not only these materials are used only for building the facilities or the infrastructure, but on top of that, they can be recovered, recycled, and reused. But of course, don't get us wrong, this figure does not account for all the specificities of different extraction techniques, the impacts of mining on sites and affected communities, and we are very aware of the need to address these impacts and to minimize materials extraction. But what these figures show is, again, an order of magnitudes, and the fact that we are talking about a completely different story, which can be a lot less destructive, provided that the safeguards are in place. And when we talk about safeguards, that's the most important message, one of the most important messages of the RESR, is that renewals, as any infrastructure, may have associated impacts, but the good news is that they can be mitigated if good practices are followed, and that policies are in place to enforce such good practices. And these good practices, some examples are here, but a lot more in the report. Of course, environmental assessments for careful siting, combining renewals with other activities like agriculture, fishing, or by using existing infrastructure, rooftops, car parks, roads, sustainable agricultural practices, and providing habitat for wildlife, using and restoring degraded land, upscaling circularity in supply chains, and of course, with early consultation and engagement of all stakeholders and potentially affected communities. And more, of course, by respecting human rights, land rights, labor rights, and the rights of indigenous peoples. And what we see is that already many of these good practices are already in place, and many stakeholders are already putting them in place and making them happen. Those examples are already in the RESR, so again, spread the word. And yes, again, the message is that any potential impacts of renewables can be mitigated or avoided, and there's no way for fossil fuels to stop harming. And so what do we do then? And well, the RESR has provided evidence that there's already enough understanding of what sustainable practices are, that solutions are available, that in many cases are already in place, and that we all have the responsibility to upscale them and make the phase out of fossil fuels a reality. Everyone has a role to play, all stakeholders. Governments can define the norms for sustainable practices, they set the rules, they put in place enforcement mechanisms, financial institutions can back these rules, put in place also requirements and make sure for these rules to be applied, make sure to channel the funds where they are the most needed. And industry players should embrace sustainable practices. In many cases, they already do. Civil society can also have a role to play by contributing with knowledge, advocacy, and by participating in decision-making and ownership in the energy system, which renewables make possible. Working together is key to achieve all this. And I will try not to spend too much more time on this and leave the floor to the panel, because we can discuss now the way forward. I would like to thank you again and talk to you later after the panel.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Yes, indeed, I'm going to echo what Andrea said. Is I really invite you to visit the link and have a look at the report, because there is a massive amount of data, references, and actually inspiring stories and examples to be discovered. Before moving to the panel discussion, we said we would take some quick direct questions to the report. I think, Andrea, there is one question I would like to ask you directly, which is, Gemma, talking to us from the UK, did the research look at how much of the minerals are currently recovered, or what sort of targets we should be aiming for? Recovery, recycling, reuse. Maybe you could elaborate a bit what is out there.
Well, what in the report, actually, this is data from our colleagues from IEA mostly. We have the recycling rates today, and what we can see is that the recycling rates are not a lot. I mean, for many minerals, like cross-cutting minerals like copper, which are already widely commercialized, the rates are better, but most of the minerals have the possibility to be almost fully recycled, and recycled rates are yet quite low. So there's a lot of potential to upscale this recycling and make this happening in a lot wider scale. And I think on the panel discussion, we will have some specialists of what policies need to be in place for this. So I hope this helps.
Yeah. So we're going to, and maybe, Andrea, because I think this was also what the report was about, right? I recall that you had mentioned so what recycling rates are basically mainstream today, but then also some really inspiring stories from I think there were like Vestas and Siemens Gamesa, right? That are actually sending a very hopeful message that can be reinforced or enforced by government. So maybe you could.
Yeah, I mean, recycling is not all. And again, this is something we learned thanks to our community. But before recycling and circular economy, you have repairing, refurbish, and reuse. So before something gets to the end of life, there's a lot of things we can do for things not to arrive at their end of life. And the examples Rana is mentioning are life extensions program from wind turbines manufacturers, which propose repair and maintenance and sometimes rewinding the copper in the wind turbines, so you don't need to change the generator. And this can extend the lifetime of a turbine of up to 10 years, for instance.
Thank you. Yes, and during the discussion, I think we'll have the possibility to dive deeper into what governments should be doing. Your graph in the beginning was 2021. Do you have any recent one in this regard? Hello from Iran.
Was it the extraction one?
Fuel. Oh, the fossil fuel one. Indeed, this was like sorry, now I realize it's the fossil fuel one. So yeah, there is 2022 data consolidated now, but I don't have the numbers in mind. So if the team has a share, we can post it here. Otherwise, I invite you to look out for the Renewable Global States report that will be upcoming in March. Developing countries' major focus is on development. Has the report assessed or showcased the advantages that it gained through use of renewable energy instead of using carbon-intensive processes?
I think it does. We have a section on energy justice showing the advantages and possibilities for local value creation in every region. Again, provided that financial solutions are in place for developing countries to access to renewables. But yes, we have addressed these topics in the report.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I see that there is a more general question to me on the renewable energy share of electricity from today 50% in Germany to over 90% in 2030 will add additional system cost of up to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. This has to be added to LCOE, so the overall electricity cost will increase by a factor 2 to 3 compared to LCOE without system cost. So how do we look at this from REN21 side? I think the first part is we obviously look at this, and I think the first message was very clear, is like we also need to put renewable energy into the overall context. So overall context means we need to phase out fossil fuel that is responsible for 75% of CO2 emissions, pollution, and biodiversity losses. And I think what is really important here is the first part, that these external costs actually are not reflected in the fossil fuel costs. So I think this is one aspect. The other one is, and I agree with you that when we're looking at the costs, there are different aspects to look at. Indeed, it's not only about the generation. We need basically the infrastructure, and there's a wider transition. Here again, I think it's so the way we look at is we're not saying that this is not the case, but we need to compare apples with apples and not apples with peers. And as an example, we see, for instance, there is quite solid data when we compare basically investment into fossil fuels and investment into clean energy, which is not only renewable energy, as you probably all know, but clean energy. And very often we see that players who are doing those comparisons will include, for instance, electric vehicles and heat pumps into this part on the clean energy side. They do not include the investment into boilers and internal combustion engine cars, which would actually really change the comparison. So I think it is also in those difficult messages about increases of LCOE that we need to really always set the context and the comparison to what is required. And I think it's also not anything new when you look at the development of fossil fuel, of the cars, etc. Infrastructure that had to be built to accompany those transitions is something that needs to happen and has happened in the past. So that's like a meta level answer. I propose that we go to the panel discussion now. I see there are more questions, but some of the panelists might jump in onto this too. And otherwise, Andrea will just loop you in again. So I'm very, very excited to have a vibrant panel here with me. And not only here with me, you have all been part of this endeavor on developing the Sorry, if you could, can you hear me? Yes. I'm just quickly going through or introduce you. Rachel Asante Owusu, a Senior Program Coordinator of the International Union for Conservation and Nature. Uta Collier, Acting Director, Knowledge Policy and Finance at IRENA. Laura Katiri, Consultant Policy Analyst for IRENA and Agora Energiewende. And Laura has co-authored the briefing on policymakers enabling a just transition, protecting human rights in renewable energy projects. So really from the human rights side. And Raffaele Rossi, Head of Marketing and Market Intelligence at Solar Power Europe. Welcome to all of you, and thanks a lot for your contribution throughout this report already. So let me ask you to kick us off. I think you have been part of the report. You have contributed. You have criticized some of the elements, which is always part of the peer review and crowdsourcing. And we had some hot debates, as Andrea said. What are your key takeaways and learning of the reports, and maybe also on the production process and the aspect of involving such a broad multi-stakeholder community? Who would like to start? Otherwise, I'm going to pick.
Okay, I'll start.
Thank you.
I mean, in a way, as you said, you know, we of course, when we were making our comments, they were constructive comments. Of course, I would call them rather than criticism. I think it reflects what one of the key findings, of course, is that it's incredibly complex. I mean, there are so many aspects to consider. I mean, for Irina, I think we mostly, like Jinlei and I, we commented on the environmental side, and then I know, Laura, you looked at human rights. Because these are kind of the areas we know a fair amount about, and then there are other areas I wouldn't have a clue. And this is it, you know, when you are doing a report like that, you have to consider so many different aspects. And I think that's where the approach you had to it really, it shows in the report that it's now so much richer because so many people, I'm sure it must have been a nightmare at the time because, you know, people throwing in, you need to consider this and that, and then these and these references, but it's come out with lots and lots of information, which I think is really valuable.
Thank you, Ute. And yes, you're exactly right. It was constructive feedback, not criticism. I think I was like, using the probably more French formulation. So Rachel, maybe you would like to.
Yes. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this webinar, and congratulations on a really excellent report. I'll follow on from what Ute said. I think that it's always challenging to try and develop these reports with a global scope because the context and the priorities are very different depending on where in the globe you're looking at a particular problem from. And so really trying to get that aspect and trying to include, it's a big report, but trying to include everything that is a priority to different stakeholders in different parts of the globe. It's challenging, and so it does require constructive debate, if I can put it like that. And I think you've come out with a very clear, good report that importantly will be a key reference for different groups and different communities globally. So I congratulate you. I'm very happy on the aspect around sustainability and environment, and also now linking renewables to issues and debates like nature positive. So not just having renewables in that carbon mitigation box, but really expanding and looking at what other roles renewable energy can play globally. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Rachel. Raffaele, I'll turn to you because the industry is indeed, I think, directly impacted by local pushback, potentially, some of the questions. What is your view on such a crowdsourced multi-stakeholder endeavor?
Yes, indeed. But maybe first of all, to begin with, that I very much approach and agree and echo the first comments that were made that this is an extremely complex topic that requires really deep dives into the details, and many times the devil is indeed in the details, not just in terms of the broad scope in terms of geography, but also when it comes to the different type of applications, sub-applications, the different chemistries that each sub-application might have. And therefore, my main takeaway from this report is that these are rather complex topics that require complex answers, and it's not easy to convey complex answers in an age of misinformation. So I really welcome this report as a knowledge hub that brings transparent information through clear, objective, and transparent information for the renewable energy sector. Now, when it comes to the multi-stakeholder approach, I think that's also something extremely important to bring together the views of different stakeholders, not just from the industry. And in particular, I'm talking about the renewable energy industry, but also bringing together stakeholder groups such as NGOs, international governance organizations, as well as governments as well. And here I would like to bring up, for example, the experience of the Solar Stewardship Initiative, which is an initiative we started together with Solar Energy UK back in 2022, aimed at promoting the responsible production in the solar energy value chain, with an aim to drive more transparent and sustainable products through the market through a quality assurance program. And this process is still ongoing. We just started a pilot, and we are looking at 2024 as the year where this will really go full scale. So what I want to bring from this experience is that the multi-stakeholder approach is really important to make sure that the confidence and the integrity and the transparency of this initiative is brought together and is not just a PR stunt or some greenwashing activity. So I really value the importance of the discussion across stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Rafael. And I think indeed the Solar Stewardship initiative has been highlighted. There were other initiatives also highlighted from the industry side, and I think I'm thinking in particular of one from the international hydropower sector, basically the International Hydropower Sustainability Alliance, where it was really interesting because in the beginning, very much driven by the hydropower industry, it has really turned into a massive multi-stakeholder approach with governments, finance, NGOs actively sitting in the governance basically of this, and also building the trust. I think that the certification is really something solid and can be a reference. So I think quite some inspiring examples that are out there and need to be mainstream. So thank you for highlighting this. Laura, we had some feedback, especially from some colleagues, basically from civil society side, that they really appreciated that such a report on sustainability was also looking into the human rights aspects, which obviously differ very much from one region to another, can differ locally. What is your view on such a report and this endeavor, and how do you think can it serve to basically mainstream renewable energy?
So I echo my colleagues' feedback that it's been a complex task, but I really applaud you for having taken the initiative and given so much prominence to a topic like energy justice. I do believe we speak about this far too little in our little community of in NGOs and governmental organizations and think tanks talking about renewable energy. I think the debate we have here is incredibly important, and I'm glad you're bringing it up. I think the report really shows really well the importance of the emerging concept of energy justice, because it's so central to ramping up support for renewable energy, both from governments and from people. But also secondly, because sustainability is a fundamental pillar of our entire narrative around climate action and renewable energy. And we cannot be credible in that message if we do not also talk about justice. What your report also shows really well is that there is no comprehensive universal definition of a just transition, because it really means different things to different people. And that's why I think you've done a fantastic job of involving so many stakeholders and giving so many people a chance to comment on it. Like Ute said, probably was a nightmare at the time, but I think it's incredibly important, and you've done so well in incorporating it. I do think as an industry, and I see how that debate has evolved over the last 10 years or so, we need to make sure that the energy transition doesn't simply repeat the mistakes that fossil fuels and other industries have made in the past. And that has often included a disregard for the environment in which energy infrastructure was being built, but also for the people who lived around that energy infrastructure. So I'm incredibly grateful that you managed to bring the terms human rights and indigenous peoples in there, because they're so important. Yeah, of course, also other parties like women, children, low-income communities that will not get magically better, or will be magically better off in a cleaner energy system. We do need to take measures to make sure we protect them from negative implications that the transition may entail for them. So kudos for including that in the report.
Thank you so much. Let me directly build on your feedback, because indeed we are also looking into what is there. I think I would agree with all of you. This is a very dynamic space. Renewables is very dynamic. We have clearly seen that sustainability has come much more to the forefront, also as a perspective of a massive renewable energy deployment. So I think this is I think one of the things we have clearly seen, it's being picked up by a diversity of players, with the objective also to not repeat errors of the past. So maybe from the energy justice side, what are good practices you would see governments should pick up to ensure that we're not only having an energy transition, but a just energy transition?
For me?
Yes, for you directly.
Yeah, I think that governments are really central to protecting people, and we have different governments involved. We have the governments of the countries in which energy infrastructure is built, but we also have got the governments of companies where the companies originate, that actually implement such projects. And I think it's just incredibly important that both sides of policy making in this regard agree that there is a certain minimum level of standard of due diligence, that social and environmental impact assessments become universal, that there is a clear recognition of the right for free, prior and informed consent for communities that are being affected by such programs. I also believe very strongly in involving communities that are being affected by renewable energy, in particular indigenous peoples, because they tend to be minimally or not at all involved in decision making typically around the world. And I do believe that these communities also need to be involved in designing the social and environmental impact assessments, and then monitoring what they mean. We have renewable energy projects that you show in your report are community driven and incredibly successful, and lead to a lot of empowerment, including of women, including of young people, of communities, of neighborhoods, and of indigenous peoples. And we have renewable energy projects where that was not successful at all. So we basically need a lot more responsibility on the side of governments to look after these people, and also move beyond the basic concept of we need to share costs and burdens, because many of the marginalized communities, of the most vulnerable communities, have already given everything they could in the past. These are often communities that have nothing more to give. So burden sharing in that regard doesn't mean moving a little bit more of a burden on people who cannot contest that. It means actually protecting them and making sure that the burden is moved to people who can actually have something to concede left.
Thank you, Laura. I'll build on this probably so we clearly see attention. You see, like when I'm listening to this, I think this is very clear, but I also think about we don't have time. We need to accelerate renewable energy deployment. I would be really interested, and I'm turning to you, Raffaele and Rachel. How do we basically bridge this tension between doing things right, also taking into account the clear constraints and the economic reality of the industry and private sector players, but then also protecting basically biodiversity. So the tension between good and quick. Is there a tension? Raffaele, maybe you start.
Sure. Yes, indeed. Of course, it's a topic of discussion, and one needs to strike the right balance between the two ultimately. But maybe going back to one of this discussion that was brought back from the audience with one question about costs. At the end of the day, if you look at LCOEs and prices, so I found this comment a bit surprising, because in the models and studies that we've been looking at, the renewables transition tends to lower costs. So of course there is a trade-off between making project as cheap as possible and making project as proper as possible, but one needs to strike the right balance between the two, and in the long term, making things right with community engagement, with proper strategic and environmental impact assessment, for example, will reap benefits and ensure long-term sustainability for the renewable energy industry. For example, by having long-term support for the renewable energy from the broader audience and the populations that we're talking about.
Yes, and I think you're right to point this out. I mean, this is also a discussion we also collectively had on how do you basically, sustainability is a complex topic. It's not the main entry point very often to renewable energy. You'll have like economic park, energy access, energy security, etc. That are key drivers for renewable energy, and so sustainability is obviously one cross-cutting or part of it. But I think it's important to underline this. Rachel, how do you see this? Because from your side, diversity and environmental impact is certainly a key entry point to renewables, right?
So it is. I'm just gonna go back and just maybe also add to the discussion around justice and global justice by starting off by saying that it's important that we realize that for millions of people around the globe, this is not a discussion about energy transition, it's a discussion about energy access, because they don't have any energy. They're not transitioning. It's about trying to build energy access. And I think that's quite important when we talk about the context. When we talk about sustainability, I think, well, first of all, let's have a discussion about why the rapid move towards renewable energy is so important. It's around answering the climate crisis. And when you then start talking about the climate and biodiversity crisis, I think one of the discussions and one of the understandings that is rapidly gaining ground is the fact that the climate and the biodiversity crisis are actually quite well interlinked, and that you're not going to be able to solve one without solving the other. So we can have renewable energy, but if renewable energy is also adding to the biodiversity crisis, we're not really solving the climate crisis in the long run. I think one of the big lessons from the fossil fuel era is that we need integrated solutions. We need to think about what unintended consequences are going to come from the solutions that we have. And if I had to give one key aspect towards sustainability and how we can marry this need for sustainability, biodiversity protection, and the rapid deployment of renewables, I would say a key aspect is going to be around planning. It's going to be around mapping of biodiversity, mapping of ecosystems, and also using that as part of the siting process for renewable energy and grid development in the future. Because if we do it properly, we only do it once, and we do it fast. And I think that's got to be the key. And it is possible. We see some very good examples of mapping from some countries like South Africa, who've done a lot of work around their biodiversity mapping, who are also moving that into identifying areas that are suitable for solar, are suitable for wind energy, and are now looking at how they incorporate their conservation management and their energy generation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Rita, maybe so what we see is indeed sustainability requires, and if we read on, the energy transition requires a systems approach, integrated solutions. When you look at the reality in many countries and how market players are organized also, so in the governments, it's still very siloed. I'm quite curious to hear, Ute, what are, is you like as an intergovernmental organizations working with your countries, what are basically the asks you see on sustainability, the challenges we might basically face for governments, or governments might face to really integrate good sustainability standards, and how can basically also such a process, data, multi-stakeholder dialogues, etc., contribute to support such governments? So,
I mean, obviously, one of the key issues is just the broader lack of capacity in many countries. You know, IRENA has 169 member states. When we look at, you know, what the size of, say, an energy department is in a European country, massive. And then in some developing countries, we really don't have many staff who even can deal with the basic renewables issues. And then the challenge here, of course, is this, as you said, is the system approach. We need to link up between different government departments, which, to be honest, even in the well-resourced countries isn't happening enough. But in many other countries, there is an even bigger gap. And it's a particular challenge for some sources like renewables, like, let's take bioenergy, for example. You know, a bioenergy approach strategy can't just look at it from an energy side. It needs to think about agriculture, about forestry, and then it might even link into health because you're trying to get away from cooking with biomass fuels, etc., etc. It's a challenging approach. Of course, yes, as intergovernmental organizations, we can make a contribution, but I think the important thing is as well that it's often the stakeholders who have a lot of the experience. You know, the stakeholders. I mean, I'm just sort of thinking back to when I was involved in sustainable hydropower 20 years ago. A lot of the pressure, of course, came from, I mean, I was working in the NGO sector at the time. A lot of it came from the NGOs initially, pressure drawing attention to the impacts, which was then taken up by, well, the UN actually at the time, because there was then an International Dams Commission, etc. And it's a really important approach to get, which it sometimes requires to get things moving on these issues. Again, you know, with the sustainability protocol, it's often just a small number of people who start to push these things.
Thank you. I think maybe building on this, because as you said, like stakeholders know and push. We're very much interested on what are the good examples we would like to see being mainstreamed. So if you could basically share one or two good examples where you feel like if we were implementing a similar approach everywhere in the world, we would be much better. Raffaele. Oh, sorry, Ute. Yeah.
So, Raffaele, you go.
Okay, sure. So maybe I can bring the example of the European Union, which is the area I know best. And depending the way you look at it and whom you ask, you can get very different answers. So whether your regulation can be taken as a positive or negative example. But overall, there are indeed a number of areas within the renewable energy field where your regulation played a positive role in harmonizing rules for environmental performance or quality or minimum standards. So for example, the WE directive, which is quite well known for end-of-life management of PV modules, set common rules across the 27 member states about recycling and collecting PV waste at the end of the life. The new EU batteries regulation will put new minimum performance, quality, as well as information requirements on batteries, both for stationary storage and EV batteries on all EU products. Another important file is the EU Eco-Design Energy Label for PV products that should be finalized this year. And this is similarly looking at topics such as carbon footprint, material content, quality, performance, recycling, and so on. So it's extremely important to have these products standardized and made more transparent. So in principle, standardization, it's a really good process, and sometimes needs to be spurred by regulation, and sometimes also comes with the industry. It's important that these two are balanced. And of course, there are minimum rules and standards that are still lacking and are under development. For example, the standards for reuse and refurbishment of PV modules. So it's really important that the cooperation continues along this way.
Maybe a quick follow-up question, Raffaele, because you referred to EU legislation. We're also in this space of the globalized market versus more regional and localized markets. What is your view on this, and to what extent? So I'm using again the hydropower example, where there's really an international certification system that has been established. Is this something we need throughout? So Ute, you mentioned bioenergy, for instance, for solar PV, batteries, EVs, etc.
Well, for sure, there needs to be a cooperation across the different geographies and policymakers across the world, as well as the industry across the world. So there are currently several examples in which harmonization didn't really take place yet. But on the other hand, you have international organizations such as the EAC that provides global standards for quality and monitoring and certifying. What's important is to ensure that there is also positive spillover effects in the moment in which a regulation comes into place that is ambitious enough, and that brings it over to countries that perhaps do not have such standards at the moment, but informally they become the standard. So this spillover effect, I think, is a quite important aspect in global standardization indeed.
Thank you. Ute, you wanted to jump into this question too. Good example.
Well, it was, yes, I mean, the thing is, like the international hydropower, well, it was a sustainability standard first, but I gather that there is now a, what is it, association with that? Yeah, that's right. I mean, that is, it is a nice example, but I mean, there is a question as well. I mean, why did that have to come about? Is to some extent is because in a lot of countries, there's also not enough regulation of, you know, how you deal with impacts, etc. I mean, I'm not saying it always has to be regulation, but I think there are certain things like environmental impact assessment. Yes, of course, it's nice to have an international standard, but the bottom line is it needs to be regulated as well by governments, because, I mean, how many hydropower plants have actually got that certification now? It's still a relatively small number, I think. And it's hard to really, you know, considering how fast we're expanding globally, I don't think we can achieve it all just through a voluntary approach. I think a lot of it will have to have some kind of regulation.
And in your membership, do you see an uptake of the sustainability topics you see on the policy and regulatory side? Is there an increasing discussion?
I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I think it does vary from country to country. And I mean, Rachel already said in a lot of countries, the challenges are different. The thing is, of course, also, you know, and this is one of the issues, the sustainability or environmental aspects often get dealt with by different ministries. The people who come to talk to us are, of course, from energy ministries. So we don't necessarily also see everything that's happening in countries, whether there is more happening in, because it would be possibly an environment department that does the legislation on impact assessment, etc. I mean, Rachel maybe knows more about that.
Rachel.
Thanks, Ute. Yes, I think you bring up some excellent points. Of course, one of the key barriers is around capacity, which I think was mentioned earlier, and around having that expertise to be able to know what a good impact assessment looks like, to be able to then know what sort of mitigation measures need to be put down in response to that impact assessment as well. And so that there is a real shortage of capacity to be able to do that and to be able to really incorporate sustainability or biodiversity aspects into renewable energy projects. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, at IUCN we're joining with the Renewable Grid Initiative to develop this new initiative, global initiative around nature grids and renewables, because what we're saying is we need to bring the expertise and the skills around biodiversity to a different stakeholder group, and to be able to build the capacity, especially in certain regions, around how we incorporate sustainability and environmental criteria in a way that still allows the rapid deployment of renewables.
Thank you. Laura, would you like to add something, and maybe also build on one of the big messages of the report is also we're also looking to sustainability to increase the benefits of renewables and to mitigate possible risks. I mean, there is also and I think I just quote an example, but the whole mobilization of the agricultural sector today, when you're looking at agri-PV, for instance, is actually a way to generate additional income for the agricultural sector in countries that are already facing massive heating. It's a way to reduce evaporation and actually increase the agricultural yield, so also an adaptation approach. These stories are basically not out at all when we listen to those players. So what are good stories to tell and to inspire to also bridge quite polarized reality in the public space?
I think you bring up some excellent examples in the report of community energy projects and projects driven by, for example, indigenous peoples. You bring up the Oceti-Sakowin, I think solar project or wind project in South Dakota. You include the example of Canadian initiatives for Canadian First Nations partnering with the private sector to build medium and large renewable energy power plants to power their communities. And those are excellent examples that show it can be done. And the difference is they're being built with the communities and not over the communities' heads. Another part of this is probably also cities. We've done a lot of work on cities at IRENA too. And you're also writing about city examples and community energy. Community energy is one of the most overlooked aspects of renewable energy deployment. And cities and neighborhoods in general are so well placed to implement projects that make use of roof space, of technologies available that work on smaller spaces that benefit neighborhoods. So we already have all these solutions. We need governments at the national, but also at the local and the regional level to start understanding renewables deployment is not just plumbing a huge solar PV plant into some large space that they somehow occupy for that. It's about working with communities and finding out what the right approach is for that. And yes, it requires capacity building, but as Rachel rightly said, if we want to do this fast and we want to do it well, then we do it once. So let's do it correctly from the start too.
Thank you. Maybe coming back to you, Rachel, we had this question about, okay, it's not only about the generation, the infrastructure, what is the cost, but I think you're specifically working with the Renewables Grid Initiative also on how to basically build the grids fast, well, and once, and with positive impact.
Yes, we are, and it's an initiative that I'm particularly excited about, because it's not an initiative that is asking for more pledges. What we are aiming to do is work with stakeholders that already have made pledges, and to say we have some skills, we have some experiences around grid development from RGI, around biodiversity measurements and metrics and conservation from IUCN, and can we help you to do what you have committed to do in a way that is more sustainable? Can we use our skills to help you reach your goals? And I think for that, it's for me, it's very exciting because we're using what we are paid to do, but we're helping others to reach their goals in a way that we believe ultimately will help us all.
Thank you. I'll build on Eddie's comment here, where he's saying, like, in the International Hydropower Association, and with the hydropower sustainability standard, it's not only about the enforcement by governments, but also by financial institutions. To what extent do you feel that this is basically key players we should get on board? And if so, I mean, that's probably interesting for the report that we carry some of the findings into financial institutions. Any views on this?
Absolutely, yes. And I mean, in fact, the multilaterals have had to take all this stuff into account. I mean, in fact, it started with hydropower, I think, more or less with the big projects that, you know, in the 80s or whenever it was, suddenly had so much opposition that they suddenly needed to really develop the safeguarding policies. And I think that to some extent, the private financial institutions have also taken this on board. I mean, there are God knows how many initiatives now. I know there's all the net zero things, but I think also with the nature-based solutions, there's been a lot of discussion around that. Obviously, you always have to be careful that it doesn't just become one of those sort of buzzwords where people or the institutions suddenly jump onto it, like sustainability used to be. Suddenly everyone talks nature-based solutions. I mean, they need to be, it needs to be a meaningful concept, and that it needs to then go into lending decisions. But there's certainly a lot more awareness, I think, about, especially about the environmental, the nature aspects than there used to be.
I completely agree with Uta, and I think that nature-based solutions it's a really good example of how the financial and investment community have moved into wanting to have more concrete definitions and also frameworks as to what it means. So it started off NBS as something that's very fuzzy. We now have a UNEA definition, we have an IUCN standard, and at IUCN we're actually working with governments to filter their development projects through an NBS lens. So it harks back to this idea that we've got to put metrics, monitoring, assessment frameworks around these good intentions that we want to have, and until we can do that, as Uta says, it becomes a little bit, it remains a little bit fluffy, and it can be an excuse for greenwashing as well.
Let me maybe build on this, Rachel, and also Raffaele, you said in the beginning, I think in your first comment, sustainability is complex. The metrics, and I think this is Andrea has also highlighted this, there is data gaps, but measuring sustainability is really a complicated topic. Obviously the link from here to what is good and what is not good is not easy to establish. So what are your views on where we stand today in terms of data gaps and metrics, and what is required to really build up close data gaps, but build up the trust in the data and the evidence that is being provided? Raphael, you're nodding.
Right, so maybe I begin and then I let others complement. So yes, indeed, it's a very difficult task to navigate through the different dimensions of sustainability. So you have different dimensions to consider at the same time. As we said, we have technologies and sub-technologies, and they're very different in the size, for example, or the applications. And on top of that, the methodologies for measuring the impacts can be very different depending on the approach you're taking. I saw there's an excellent box in the report highlighting the complexity of the life cycle assessments and the comparability between the two. And then on top of that, something that was alluded to by the other panelists is that renewable energy projects can be very different from one to one another, and they're very individual and site specific. So for example, last year we published a solar and biodiversity report, and one of the highlights of the report is that indeed the specific condition for each project needs to be assessed, and site-specific consideration should be made even in those situations in which it might seem a no-brainer. For example, even a degraded land might constitute a shrine for flora and fauna. And as such, the environmental impact assessment is extremely important, but then again, the way data is collected is also extremely important. And we are at the start of a journey, and of course, not all data we would like to get is available as of now. So it's a matter of starting monitoring and ensuring that the data is collected in a harmonized manner. So indeed, the solution I see to that is towards harmonization of methodologies, metrics, parameters, and setting global standards. So we go back to the standardization.
Thank you.
I would happily add that I think the data issue is huge for us, because how long have we talked just about gender, and we're still struggling to collect gender representative data. We still don't understand enough how women use energy, what they need. We still don't even have enough job data for women working in the renewable energy industry itself, and we're trying or suggesting that we should be and could be doing it better in renewable energy. We lack systematic household energy data use reports for all countries virtually. So it's very difficult to understand how the exact impact of whatever we do on people, if we don't understand how they really use energy, and we need to rely on sometimes 10, 15, 20-year-old reports and assume that nothing much has changed. We don't have any data for indigenous peoples typically. Our whole development data, our energy data is blind to all of these aspects. And then we come to more qualitative data. I'm an economist. Economics is incredibly bad at measuring environmental value and the value nature brings, the value of biodiversity, not to mention things like undeveloped land, coherent undeveloped land. Some large-scale renewable energy projects simply are built on land that is not formally occupied, but is used by pastoralists who then lose their land for pasture. That's a problem. We don't assign any economic value to land that is valuable for cultural or spiritual reasons to peoples, but for the people who live there, it's often devastating if that land then is developed. And the solutions can be relatively benign. You can slightly change siting, but we're not taking these considerations up in our planning and mapping and outlining, because the people who are being impacted aren't being involved in the design, in the initial stages. In the best case, they're being given a ready-made plan and asked, do you agree or not? And in reality, there is no real choice. The choice then is only take it or leave it. If you take it, we give you a bit of money to compensate you. If you leave it, we give you nothing, and we're going to build it anyway. So here is where the injustice aspect comes from, but it's also where the problem for the industry comes from, because that can actually lead to large-scale projects that are being built and later on taken down by court decisions. So that's the worst outcome for everyone, and it results in a lot of loss of credibility for renewable energy in countries. So the data issue really is at the core, and we're not doing enough. And we need much more of that.
Maybe building on this, Laura, because I think what both of you said, Raffaele and yourself, Laura, is it's not only about the what, but also about the how. So how and who is contributing to this? Maybe a question to you, Ute and Rachel, is the way forward, because I think there is very clearly a message. This is a discussion that is starting. The renewable transition needs to be accelerated. It needs to happen. We need to make it happen together. What are your views? What can we collectively do, and how can crowdsourcing, multi-stakeholder approaches, etc., contribute to better metrics, quantitative, qualitative, but also an inclusive approach, probably, on building the support? Any views and guidance?
Well, I'll start by saying that I completely agree with some of the points Laura made earlier about inclusiveness and also about ownership of problems. So it's not about coming to community and saying we have an answer, but really building answers and solutions together. I think it's also about looking at different stakeholders who have different skills and working out how we can come together to work together to solve specific challenges, with robust solutions. It's, you know, when we start talking about data and metrics, it's, as everybody said, it's very, very challenging. If we were only measuring carbon, but you know, once you start trying to measure social aspects and biodiversity aspects, it does become complicated. I would say that there are, you know, when it comes to particular biodiversity, that there are some glimmers of hope on the horizon with technology. I think there's a lot that we can now do using technology, different technologies from AI to eDNA techniques, which will allow us to get far more data more rapidly. It doesn't necessarily help with Laura's issues around social mapping and social data. I recognize that, but there are some glimmers of hope. I think we need to carry on having multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder platforms like REN21, and we need to come together where we have these common challenges around climate, around the expansion of renewables, and look at, as I say, what expertise and what guidance different stakeholders can bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. Maybe to build on this multidisciplinary, and I'll turn to you, because we realized, and I think this was one of the outcome of the team also, that bridging the sustainability community and the renewables community really required stepping back, understanding different entry points and thinking, and bridging even the language to some extent. So it's not always linear. And maybe Ute, with regard to this, what is your view on, so what do we need to have better data, but also this process where all players that are relevant and need to participate can really be involved? So the way forward, the next 2-3 years, what is our task?
Oh God, I mean, the data issue, okay, there is the problem, like Raffaele said, a lot of it is actually about localized issues. So you know, that can only be solved by ensuring that there is a very sound assessment process, which leaves enough time as well, because, you know, when you're doing surveys, I mean, say bird surveys, you need to be sure you're doing it during different points of the year, you catch a migration period, etc. So you can't have too many shortcuts, which is also a problem then, of course, for us trying to accelerate the transition. So I think that's a challenge, and this is where we do need, certainly at the national level, but maybe also at regional levels or through various forums, to find good practice ways of cutting the time period to approvals, but ensuring it's still a very sound process. And I don't think that's an easy thing to do. I also find it's really important that, you know, we've got to recognize that there can potentially be problems. There seems to be, you know, we do have the thing, we have a lot of, we all evangelists to some extent. Yes, we all love renewables, but let's recognize, and that's, you know, we accept, of course, fossil fuels are worse, but let's recognize that not all renewables are great, or not every single project is great. But then we also need to find a common ground, which sometimes seems very, very difficult. Having worked on issues like bioenergy, you know, sometimes you feel you're just never going to meet anywhere in the middle. So we do need, I don't know what additional platforms we need. I think it would be good for REN21 certainly to think where to go from this, because this report is sort of almost the first of a kind. Which has brought a lot of these issues together. So now we need to think, is there a sort of follow-up, and what exactly that would be? I don't really have a firm answer. I think that needs more discussion.
I think there is maybe building on this, and we're unfortunately for tech reasons, we lost a bit of time in the beginning, but so we have like 3 minutes left. I would like to pick up on 2 comments in the part, which is an example in Germany where basically the heat transition and the heat pump deployment, one of the analysis why there has been such a pushback, communication is at the heart of it. So I think, and this is something we have really also seen in the process, how sensitive the communication about sustainability is, getting the right messages, the metrics out, but also how to position it and always manage how it's being picked up by players who might actually not be convinced that renewable energy is the right way to go. And then also the fact that we're over intellectualizing the issue. The reality is, like, if we want to reach the broad population where we also might have like a local pushback, how do we get messages out? I'll give each of you 30 seconds. I'll just mention one example. Interestingly, in media interviews, you see, at one point I started to say, like, it's a reality if you buy an H&M t-shirt that has been produced in Portugal or in Bangladesh, the impacts, where the sustainability impacts are completely different. And interestingly, everybody said, like, oh yes. So it's just super obvious. Is this something where we're indeed having a too techy discussion and not referring to what is already a day-to-day reality in our societies and surroundings? So 30 seconds for you on the role of comms and a wish for the next year on renewables and sustainability. Laura. Sorry, you're muted.
Okay. Communication is critical. We need to have people on board, but we also need to have social debate and discussion. It's absolutely essential. Otherwise, we can't move forward.
Thank you. Rachel.
It's critical. Good communication means that we listen to all viewpoints, and maybe we don't, I think we don't need to intellectualize, but we don't also need to come to the table thinking we're necessarily totally right, or this other person's totally wrong. I think we need to start trying to meet each other a little bit in the middle with the communications as well.
Ute.
Yes, agreed. Although it's very difficult, you know, I struggle having a conversation with wind energy opponents, for example. But yes, we need to try and understand where they're coming from, and then I guess counter with rational arguments. But a bit of passion doesn't hurt, I think.
I think we probably all agree on this. Raffaele, and then I'll ask Andrea to join us here too.
Right. On my side, I would mention the inclusiveness and affordability of renewable energy technologies. Otherwise, it can be very much opposed, and that's a legitimate concern. And when it comes to communication, also an important remark is that you just need one bad project to make big headlines. So you need to make sure that minimum standards are always adhered to.
So basically the message is we need many, many good projects. Andrea, your takeaways after the discussion, the process, and your wish.
Well, takeaways as for many, and yeah, I agree. I mean, just on the oversimplifying and intellectualizing, I think we are talking again as with complex issues. It takes only one bad project to make all the projects bad. It also needs that we also have the tools, to deploy renewables in a sustainable way. So we really should take responsibility for that and continue this work, continue bringing the knowledge and the perspectives together to make advance this work and this knowledge base, so we can again communicate about it. And yeah, just again a big thank you to everyone for the contribution.
Okay, thanks from my side to everybody who has contributed. My dear panelists here, Andrea, the REN21 Secretary team, and I think all of you who have participated in the discussion. And I think I really like this part of communication is important, but social debate is key. And I think this is basically very clear. We need to collectively carry this forward and also carry it out of this energy bubble and energy and sustainability bubble. So here is a challenge and an invitation to all of you is please reach out to us where we should bring this debate. Let's collectively get the messages out. My colleagues have shared the social media packages. So please help us spread the words, great initiatives, and use this as a start, because I'm pretty sure that you're doing all hundreds and thousands of great projects that basically need to be known by the different decision makers. So let's all chip in to get the message out and make the transition happen in a sustainable way. Thanks a lot. Looking forward to continuing the discussion.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.